Hello, today I'm going to give my thoughts on my top 10 occult folk horror films indie edition. These are going to be independent films. I'm going to try and avoid spoilers for the most part. First thing is that indie films often have flaws, so none of these films are perfect. In my opinion, it was a difficult list to assemble for this reason. I watched a lot of films to try to find what I thought were the top 10. If you agree or disagree with my list, you can chime in below, but I'm going to start with some honorable mentions. The first one is a film called The Wind from 2018. I thought it was quite silly. There were some good ideas here, but the execution was poor. It's basically a folk horror western, and there are some interesting things that are going on, but it's just not done well. And next we have The Hollow from 2015. Again, pretty good ideas, but not quite there. There's just something about it, I thought it kind of missed the mark. And the final one is Kill List from 2011. I definitely think this is the best of the honorable mentions, but it's not quite good enough to make it on the list. I do have a different film by the same filmmaker on the list, but this one, I just thought it was too long. They could have cut out probably 15 minutes and it would have been a lot better. The ending was interesting. I didn't see it coming, but a lot of the stuff in the middle it was a little bit too like people yelling at each other all the time, and it just kind of felt the same tone. At number 10 we have Häxan from 1922, also known as Häxan Witchcraft Through the Ages, directed by Benjamin Christensen, and the actors are Benjamin Christensen and Maren Peterson. It's a silent docudrama blending historical accounts of witch hunts with surreal horror imagery. Its eerie reenactments and medieval folklore make it a foundational folk horror film. So this was produced by a Danish film studio outside the Hollywood system, and it's structured as a mix of historical events and educational essay on medieval superstition. Due to its explicit depictions of torture, nudity, and satanic rituals, Häxan was heavily censored and banned in several countries, including the USA. At the budget of 2 million Swedish kroner, Häxan was the most expensive Scandinavian film at the time. It's based on the 15th century witch hunting manual Malleus Maleficarum, which fueled the European witch trials. The director actually played the devil in this, and his flicking of his tongue at a woman is one of the most iconic portrayals of Satan in early cinema. There is a shortened version called Witchcraft Through the Ages that was released in 1968 with a voiceover by beat writer William S. Burroughs. This kind of adds a counterculture appeal to the film. The first time I saw this was back in my stoner days. I did have a phase of that, and this was a good film to watch at that time, I think. Back then, I was very into silent films. I was watching many of them. And maybe at some point I'll do a top 10 silent film list. I'm not sure. There are a lot of good ones. I think more than people actually think. And there are many that are occult, and there are many that are kind of just strange. So I might do a list on that. But I think the best thing about this film is the imagery. It's quite iconic, and I would say quite successful for the time. Usually stuff from this time looks a little bit janky, but this is top notch. At number 9 we have Lemora, A Child's Tale of the Supernatural from 1973, directed by Richard Blackburn, starring Leslie Taplin, Cheryl Smith, and William Whitten. A gothic fever dream following a young girl who falls into the clutches of a mysterious woman linked to vampiric forces. Its southern gothic atmosphere and fairy tale horror aesthetics make it a haunting folk horror cult classic. So this was quite controversial upon its release. It's a mix of a vampire story, folk horror, and southern gothic. Although the vampire stuff for me is a bit strange, the Lemora character is a little bit more like a Lilith or like a demoness. There's some other kind of pseudo vampires in it, but I don't know, it's just not normal vampire film. I think it definitely leans more to folk horror. So due to its limited release and legal disputes, Lemora was difficult to find for years, and during this time it became a cult favorite. It was shot on a tiny budget. The film relies on atmospheric lighting, dreamlike cinematography, and unsettling sound design to create its eerie tone. And there are moments of true eeriness here. I mean, it's kind of a strange film. There are these kind of feral vampire creatures that suggest an ancient degenerate form of vampirism, and because of that, this leans more into the Southern Gothic vibe, because there's like this corrupted bloodline, sort of generational thing going on, generational horror. The film borrows a lot from Little Red Riding Hood and Alice in Wonderland, in the same way that Dario Argento's Suspiria borrows from Snow White. Cheryl Smith, the character Lila, she was only 14 or 15 years old when this was shot, and there's some very uncomfortable sexual undertones to the film, and some of them involve her. I definitely think this film could not be made now. There's no way this film would be made now. Another thing about this is that some of the actors' performances are quite strange. They're over the top in this very odd way, and I think that's what makes you really see that it's an indie, is that the acting is just off the wall. The woman that plays Lemora is great, but there's this guy that's like a bus driver that's just like, I don't even know where they got this guy, but he is just really strange. Now with that said, this kind of has a charm because of it. It's definitely this odd mix. I certainly don't think it's perfect. In fact, it's far from perfect, but there are definitely some interesting things here. At number 8, we have Eyes of Fire from 1983, directed by Avery Krauss, starring Dennis Lipscomb, Guy Boyd, and Rebecca Stanley. Set in 18th century America, this tale follows a group of exiled settlers who encounter a sinister supernatural force in the wilderness. Merging colonial history with indigenous folklore, it's a chilling folk horror gem. So this is a blend of folk horror, American frontier mythology, and occult themes. I would say you could compare it a little bit to the film The Witch, although this is not nearly as amazing as that. However, there is something here. I talk more extensively on it in my top 10 underappreciated horror films video. You can check that out if you want to know more about it. I'm not going to talk too much about it here. It's low budget, but there's high atmosphere. Their shoestring budget was used to its utmost. There are definitely some unsettling scenes in this. It relies on surreal visuals, fog-drenched landscapes, and unsettling sound design rather than heavy special effects. There are some interesting photographic effects in this. There are also some very odd horror sequences. There's also a lot of layered imagery going on, multiple exposures and stuff. It's very dreamlike. It has some interesting performances. It plays with the idea that certain places are inherently evil and claimed by supernatural forces, similar to Native American folklore about haunted land. It hints at indigenous magic and spirits that clash with Christian ideology, which is often the case in folk horror. The spirits in it seem kind of connected to the Green Man archetype to some degree. Anyway, it's quite interesting. If you want to know more, check out my other video. At number 7, we have Luz, the Flower of Evil, 2019, directed by Juan Diego Escobar Alzante. The actors are Yuri Vargas, Andrea Esquivel, and Conrado Osorio. A mesmerizing folk horror western set in an isolated mountain village where a religious leader's belief unravels into madness. This is visually stunning and thematically rich, I'd say. It explores faith, power, and the sinister forces of nature. It's a slow burn descent into religious fanaticism and the collapse of faith. If I was to compare it to any film, I would compare it to Apostle, perhaps. Although I don't think it's as good as Apostle, but it definitely has a similar vibe going on. But I mean, I think this film's strength is its beauty. It's on Tubi for free if you want to check it out. The first thing about it is the desaturated color is gorgeous. It looks like an ad from a 1970s magazine or something. It's just beautiful. The second thing is the use of the moon or the stars in certain scenes is quite enchanting. It's kind of this rear projection magic. You know, if you ever watch old movies where they're driving in cars and there's the rear projection, sometimes it's just really beautiful. The director said he was influenced by The Witch, Valhalla Rising, and Terrence Malick's poetic cinematography. It's filmed in remote mountainous regions, emphasizing isolation and an almost otherworldly setting. Film is highly metaphorical, prioritizing allegory and visuals over a conventional horror structure. The character of El Señor is a self-proclaimed messianic figure, reminiscent of real-life cult leaders like Jim Jones or David Koresh. But there is a perversion of faith going on here, because of course there is. It's folk horror. The flower of evil is an inversion of the Garden of Eden. There is corrupted beauty here, much like Lucifer being the most beautiful angel before his fall. My only criticism is I think about 15 minutes, 20 minutes should have been cut out of this. There's just a lot of scenes of talking, and it doesn't really add a lot to the film. It's a little long for what it is, and it kind of drags a bit in the middle. But the beginning and the end are quite worth it. At number 6, we have The White Reindeer from 1952, also known as Vakoinen Perua, probably saying that wrong, directed by Erik Blomberg. This is a Finnish folk horror classic about a lonely woman cursed to transform into a vampiric reindeer. Blending Sami mythology with haunting cinematography, it's a poetic yet unsettling tale of isolation and dark desires. So this was released in 1952, so it kind of predates a lot of the folk horror boom of the late 60s and 1970s. I think this is a haunting film. There is lush black and white, it's beautiful. It opens with this bleak song and images of this harsh, snowy environment. And that's something to point out. This film feels authentic. The players are freezing. They're in danger of being impaled by reindeer constantly because they're like grabbing reindeer and wrestling reindeer. From what I can tell, they don't look like stunt men or women. So I suspect they did their own stunts. It's crazy to think that when you're watching this, because there are scenes where there are herds of reindeer and these people are just grabbing the reindeer and like wrestling with them, and I'm just like, wow, okay. It's short at about 70 minutes, and it takes about 20 minutes for it to get going. I wasn't really sure where it was going, although the cinematography is so beautiful, I didn't really care. It's not that scary, partly because of the time. If it had been made maybe 20 years later, it probably would have been much scarier. There are a few eerie parts though, and sometimes it's unsettling. And I will say this, the folk magic feels very authentic. It's kind of like this witch, werewolf, siren story. That's the only way to really describe it. It dives deep into folk animism, and I imagine that this was impossible to shoot. You have clean blankets of white snow, no footprints. You have these people walking across the landscape and then there are footprints. So either they had to move every shot or clean it up somehow. And it's not fake snow like in some movies. This is real environment. I read somewhere that the Hoth scenes in The Empire Strikes Back were very, very difficult to shoot. And I suspect that these are similar. Also, when you read about films where there are animals involved, that's always difficult, and there are a lot of animals in this, so that's another factor. I would love to see a modern remake of it. I think it would be interesting, because there are definitely some good ideas here. If they did a remake, I think it could be quite scary and heartbreaking if done correctly. At number 5, we have A Field in England from 2013, directed by Ben Wheatley. The actors are Reese Shearsmith, Julian Barrett, and Michael Smiley. A surreal and experimental horror set during the English Civil War, where a group of deserters unwittingly become pawns in an occult ritual. Its hypnotic visuals and mysticism create a uniquely unsettling folk horror experience. This was very close to being a masterpiece, but I think it missed the mark a little bit. It is surreal, hallucinogenic, and kind of odd. It was shot in just 12 days, which is impressive. The alchemist O'Neill represents a magician-like figure seeking the treasure buried in the field, possibly a metaphor for philosophical enlightenment or madness. The characters ingest hallucinogenic mushrooms, leading to visions, time distortions, and psychic breakdowns. The field is a liminal space. It acts as a purgatory-like dimension outside normal time and space. And this concept aligns with folklore ideas like fairy rings or cursed battlefields where time loops and spirits linger. There's disjointed editing, all kinds of different time things going on, and bizarre imagery that create an almost Lovecraftian sense of powerful, unknowable forces at work. I thought this was better than Kill List. I mentioned that in the honorable mentions. Although like that film. I think the pacing is a bit off here, and it's too long and not scary enough, in my opinion. It seems a bit like a missed opportunity. The pieces are all there, but it just misses greatness. I will say the acting and casting is great, and there are definitely some things to admire about this. I just wish it could have gotten there, because if it had gotten there, this movie would have been amazing. Number 4 is The Blair Witch Project from 1999, directed by Daniel Myrick and Eduardo Sanchez. The actors are Heather Donahue, Michael C. Williams, and Joshua Leonard. A groundbreaking found footage horror film following filmmakers who vanish while investigating the legend of the Blair Witch. Its documentary style realism and deep-rooted folklore make it one of the most effective modern folk horror films. So the filmmakers created fake police reports, missing person flyers, and a website that convinced many people that the events were real. I remember this hype, actually. It was a $60,000 budget, which is quite low, and it made nearly $250 million. That's quite a success. The absence of a visible witch or monster aligns with Lovecraftian horror. Fear of the unknown is more terrifying than anything shown on screen. And in this case, it's a little bit like Jaws. The less you see, the better it is. And like most folk horror, this portrays the land itself as sentient or kind of malevolent. The stickmen and stone cairns are quite creepy, but the film takes way too long to get going, in my opinion. The last 5 minutes of this are definitely where it's at. That's the scariest part of this film. And it makes me wish that there was a little bit more of that. It doesn't have to be a lot more, but maybe like 10 minutes or maybe 15 minutes of that. It doesn't all have to be at the end either. Just a little more of that would have made this a lot better. And regardless what you think, this has inspired so many films. All of the found footage subgenre basically stems from this. It was distributed by major studios and stuff, and it definitely became a large film, but its indie roots are definitely there. For me, it's just another missed opportunity. Almost greatness. A lot of these films, it's a repeated thing here, is that almost greatness. At number 3, we have What Josiah Saw from 2021, directed by Vincent Grashaw. The actors are Robert Patrick, Nick Stahl, and Kelly Garner. A slow-burning psychological folk horror about a fractured family haunted by past sins and supernatural dread in their decaying farmhouse. Its blend of rural Gothic horror and psychological torment makes for an unrelenting and eerie experience. This was unexpected and unpredictable. The film's tone and themes draw influence from Flannery O'Connor's grotesque Southern literature. Robert Patrick's deeply disturbing father figure is reminiscent of Old Testament prophets turned cult leaders, is a tour de force of a creepy Southern patriarch. This is strange because you follow two characters for a while, but then it jumps to another story. What's going on? Is this an anthology? Doesn't really say. But the story gets so weird and unpredictable that you get drawn in anyway. Everything gets wrapped up in the end, but it's a strange way to structure the story. It's a strange journey. I give them credit for trying something so bold, though. When you're watching something like that and it takes a right turn, it can check out a lot of people. But in my case, it actually, the second story thread actually drew me in more, because the first part I was kind of like, I don't know. This is mostly about judgment and regrets, sin and redemption, and like a lot of these films, the land itself holds the family's suffering. It's a generational curse, very similar to the fall of the House of Usher, I think. I'm not going to say too much about it, but the scenes with the gypsies are amazing. Quite scary, one particular scene, and the twist at the end I did not see coming, and it was also quite effective. At number 2, we have Hagazussa from 2017, also known as Hagazussa, A Heathen's Curse, directed by Lucas Feigelfeld, and the actors are Alexandra Gwen, Selena Peter, and Claudia Martini. A bleak and atmospheric horror about a 15th century woman accused of witchcraft descending into isolation and madness. Immersed in pagan folklore and psychological terror, it's an unflinching meditation on trauma, superstition, and the power of nature. This starts with this booming bass drum that kind of echoes in the snowstorm, and then there's this droning guitar or electric cello, I'm not really exactly sure, but it comes in and it's got this doom metal vibe, and it's super effective. It sets the stage quite well. The film is beautifully shot. A lot of it is by candlelight. I've said this already a few times in the video, but this one is definitely reminiscent of The Witch. It's got minimal dialogue, and the music is used minimally but successfully. The atmosphere is eerie. There's some very iconic imagery here. Something that sets this apart, I think, is the fact that the point of view of this is from The Witch. So there's this kind of pathos or empathy going on to some degree. Hagazussa is from Old High German. It translates roughly to hedge rider, an old term for witches or shamans who live between the worlds of the natural and supernatural. When it comes down to it, this is a character drama about the role of an outsider. It's also about the persecution of women, especially those who choose to live alone or outside of society. There are long stretches of silence. It's quite dreamlike, almost trance-inducing. There is zero CGI. It's all practical effects, use of natural lighting, real locations, and minimal special effects in general. I will warn you, it's quite disturbing. There's some scenes of decay, rot, and bodily transformation that are pretty gross at times. It just has this authenticity to it that I appreciated. At number 1, we have The Dark and the Wicked from 2020, directed by Brian Bertino. The actors are Marin Ireland, Michael Abbott Jr., and Xander Berkeley. Set on a desolate Texas farm, a brother and sister return home to care for their dying father, only to be tormented by a malevolent presence. Combining rural isolation with supernatural horror, it delivers an unrelenting atmosphere of dread and despair. Okay, so this was by far the scariest film I've seen in quite some time. I'm not exaggerating. The first 5 minutes of this are scarier than this entire list, I think. In fact, I would go so far as to say a lot of these films aren't overly scary, but this one definitely is. And after it finished, I was generally spooked for the rest of the night. I kept replaying parts in my head, and I was just like, wow, that was pretty scary. This is about the isolation and eerie quiet of rural life, where grief and trauma can feel like supernatural forces themselves. Similar to the cabin fever that is on display in The Shining, there's this overwhelming sense of dread, people losing their minds, what is real, what isn't real. One of the highlights is the sound design. It is used to unnerve the audience to great effect. There is almost no backstory on the entity haunting the farm, no explanation, no ancient curse, no way to fight it. Just pure existential horror. It thrives on fear, sorrow, and hopelessness. This is kind of similar to the folklore of the Wendigos, or the black-eyed children, where supernatural beings manipulate emotions to weaken their victims. And I think The Hollow tried to do this, but this is way more successful. This is about the crushing inevitability of death and evil, a hopeless descent into terror that never lets up. I recommended this to a friend, and she also said it was scary as hell, so be warned. But that's all I got for my indie folk horror films. If you have anything to say about any of these, if you think some are good or don't belong on this list, or if I missed something, you can comment below with that. But that's all I got for today. Take care. Have a good day.